What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin, coming to you with another video. And today, we're going to be talking about the box office, but I'm also going to be doing something a little bit different in that I'm going to be talking about Rotten Tomatoes and how to actually read Rotten Tomatoes scores. Rotten Tomatoes, of course, has gotten a lot of flack, some praise, depending on the movie that you're going to see, but I think it's important for us to understand just how to read Rotten Tomatoes for when you go see a movie, if you even care about Rotten Tomatoes. I know that a lot of people, especially after The Last Jedi, really don't trust the critics over at Rotten Tomatoes, but I do want to say, and do want to come to the defense of them in certain situations. But again, it all matters, or rather it all depends on how you are to read them for a particular film and how to read them, and I'm going to go into that in a second. But first, just a little box office update. So this weekend, nothing really major came out. We had The Nun, we had Peppermint. Peppermint's looking to do okay, 12 to 13 million over the weekend as a projection. Got a B+ from CinemaScore, which is pretty good. On the other hand, you had The Nun, which looks like it's going to make $50 million with a C rating. And to me, that just tells you the difference. Is that you had Peppermint, which was for the most part, enjoyed by audiences. And you know what, to be honest, I think Peppermint's going to do fine. I think it's going to end up making money. It's not going to be a huge box office success, but it's going to make money. But then you got films like The Nun, which to me, based on that C rating and based on the readings that I've had from not only critics but also audiences, it looks like for some reason audiences have just not caught on to the fact that most horror films that come out are usually total garbage, and yet they will still go out of their way to spend their money on the ticket to go see it and then complain about it afterwards. If you want better horror films coming out of Hollywood, don't see movies like The Nun. Don't support these big budget or these big premiere films like this that are part of these big franchise films that have never really done a whole lot as far as bringing the horror genre forward. Again, if you like those kind of things, if you like jump scares, if you like cheap jump scares like that, hey, that's fine. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it is, again, to me, this is a very good commentary on the current state of horror films. The fact that a movie like that will make $50 million over a weekend, but then a film like Peppermint, which is better received by most audiences, will make less. It just kind of a commentary there. But as I said, I wanted to spend most of the video today talking about how you read Rotten Tomatoes. And to me, this is something that I've always known, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who's going to be watching this saying, oh, well, I already know how to read Rotten Tomatoes, or I figured out my own way to decipher it, or even I don't care about Rotten Tomatoes anymore. And guess what? I respect you no matter where you are on the spectrum. But for anyone that does want to use Rotten Tomatoes, or anyone that does actually still use it, I wanted to kind of give you a way to kind of read the different ratings, how to read and how to know exactly what kind of a movie this is. So, perfect example right now is this one, where we see where the critics rating is extremely high, but then the audience rating is extremely low. What does that tell us? Well, for one thing, it means that critics like it for an obvious reason. Either one, it's either a very well-made technical film, which again, as many flaws as Star Wars: The Last Jedi has, I don't think anyone's going to deny the fact that it's at least presentable. It's at least polished. It's at least something good to look at in certain ways. I mean, no one's going to complain about the visual effects, for example, or some of those qualities. So again, we can see that maybe that's a reason why. Or also, and we see this is often the case with a lot of films, maybe there's some other underlying political reason why critics will like a film. So as we know with The Last Jedi, Star Wars: The Last Jedi, there's been this huge push for, oh, the Force is female and strong female characters, and let's talk about females and women and all this other stuff. And it makes a lot of sense then that the critics would be artificially putting these scores as high as they are. But you look over to the audience. What does that tell you? It tells you that half the audience hated the movie, while the other half liked it. Again, there is a split there, but it does tell us a little bit more about it. You don't just take one score. Here's the first bit of advice when reading Rotten Tomatoes scores. You don't just take one score. You have to look at both of them together. And again, when you see a high critics and a low audience, that's when you're probably going to want to actually start to read some of the critic reviews and some of the audience reviews to get a better idea of what this film actually is and who this film is made for. This film was obviously made with critics in mind, made with people with identity politics mindsets in mind, and not made for the general audience. And we can pretty much pick that apart as to why The Last Jedi has so many problems and really isn't made for the fans, really isn't made for or to make the fans happy, but rather it was made for Rian Johnson and made for people like the critics, like the minds of the various critics. So that's one example. Again, high critic rating, low audience rating. Let's get to The Nun, the movie that I just talked about. As I said before, we saw, or rather I said that, the cinema score for it was around a C. Well, when we looked at Rotten Tomatoes, it gives us a pretty good idea. Again, that's pretty consistent with that. A 29% from critics, and on top of that, a 52% from audience. So that tells us that both audiences and critics don't like this film. Critic rating, when we read a film like this, means it's not well made, there's some technical problems, there's some story problems, etc. So we can know that from an objective standpoint that there are some flaws, that there are a lot of flaws. In fact, there are not just some flaws, there are more than the average film's kind of flaws. That's when you get a number like 29% or lower, but then you jump over to the audience rating, 52%. Again, that tells you that some people might like it, some people might hate it, but it's not nearly as strong as it could be. Again, 52% is not a very good audience score, but again, we have to dive into these things. We have to read into these numbers to better understand what is actually being said about the film. Again, we know that The Nun's making money, but we do know that, again, Cinema Score and now Rotten Tomatoes both give us a good idea of what the audiences are thinking about this film, which to me reads as, don't go see it. It's not worth it. Critics obviously see that it's not a well-made film. Audiences are obviously, mirroring that perception. So this is a situation where you look at it and say, okay, this is not a good movie. I should probably skip it, or I should probably wait until it comes out on DVD or Blu-ray, or when it comes out on Netflix. That's how you would read this score, because when the both audiences and critics are saying very bad things about a movie, most likely, and again, there are very rare exceptions to this, but most likely it's a film that you should just not waste your time with. Let's get to Peppermint. If you want a further explanation of Peppermint and the reviews and how the reviews went into this film and my own personal thoughts on this film, go check out my channel, Ode's Movie Blog. I actually just posted a review yesterday talking about this film. But anyway, when we look to these scores, we see a 13% from Rotten Tomatoes, but yet a 78% from audiences. And so that is, again, you see there's that giant shift. There's that giant difference. So just like with The Last Jedi, for this one, you would say, well, why do the critics not like it? This is when you're going to want to dive into what the critics are having to say. And what was the biggest problem with this film? It wasn't progressive enough. It had racial stereotypes. It did not forward the female agenda. Those were the kind of reviews. And again, you can read the reviews for yourself or even check my video on that where I show some of them. And that's the reason why critics did not like it. So it tells us that, yes, to be as low as 13%, it means that there's going to be some objective flaws. And there are objective flaws with Peppermint, but not 13%'s worth. That's where you get, when you have a number that low, there is usually a political motivation behind it. And again, how can we know that? Because audiences are really liking it. So it obviously is not a terrible garbage tier film. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a 78% rating from audiences. So again, we have here opposite ends. We have low critics, high audience, tells us that, hey, this is at least going to be an entertaining film. And even if this number was a little bit higher from critics, even if it was a little bit more justifiable in its overall percentage, what we would still be able to take away from this is that audience score. Anytime you have a high audience rating, it means it's going to be a fun movie. Most likely. It means that you're most likely going to enjoy it. It might be entertaining, a popcorn flick, etc. That is what you can always bet on, and that's why audience score is usually the one that I go with, but it always doesn't tell everything, because there are sometimes really well-made films that I might like just from a subjective standpoint, but a lot of audiences might not. Again, we've seen that happen before, where there have been very high critically praised films that just weren't, like, for example, The Witch. I haven't seen The Witch yet, but based on everything I've seen, I think I've seen half the film. Based on everything I've seen, it's a really good film. The problem was that it was marketed as this massive horror film, and it wasn't. And so audiences gave it very low scores. So that's an example of a film that can be really good, but still have bad audience scores. Usually, again, when you have a low audience score, high audience score, that's usually the better place to look. But you should never ignore completely the critics' rating, because it does usually tell you a lot. Great example is right here with Mission Impossible. So again, Mission Impossible Fallout, if you haven't seen it yet, go see it. This one has a 97% of from Rotten Tomatoes and 89% critic from the audience rating. Now, also keep this in mind. When you see that 97%, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that it's aggregating all the different scores. What it means is that 97% of critics gave the movie a fresh rating. Means it gave it a positive rating, gave it essentially a thumbs up. So 97% of the critics that submitted a review to Rotten Tomatoes gave it a thumbs up, while 3% gave it a thumbs down. And that's why you can see even there, the fresh ratings are 333, while the rotten ratings are 10. And that's where you have to read that. That's where you have to understand that. And then that is also where you get your better idea. And again, that's why the average rating, 8.3, is not the same as the Rotten Tomatoes number, because it's gauging something very different. Audience rating, on the other hand, that is where you can look over, because again, 89% of audience members liked it, but you also get that audience rating. 4.3 out of 5 is the average for people. So again, when you go to Rotten Tomatoes, and again, if you are still going to Rotten Tomatoes, the important thing is to look at both scores, because they both tell a story. And when you have a movie like this that has a high audience and also a high critic rating, that's a movie that you should go see. So again, here, Both are high. Go see this film. It's going to be great. And guys, Mission Impossible Fallout is fantastic. Go see it. The best Mission Impossible film in the franchise. I will fight anybody on that if they think otherwise. Peppermint. Audiences like it. Critics not so much. But again, we looked into it. It's for political reasons. So audience gave it a 78%. One that you might want to go see. Again, you don't have to. It's not an 89, 90% audience rating, but it's still pretty good. So go check it out. The Nun. Low critic, low audience. Probably should skip this one. Again, it looks like it's just another lazy horror film that's just trying to get your money, trying to give you a bunch of cheap scares without actually giving you a whole much from the movie-going experience. And then you get The Last Jedi. High critic rating, low audience rating, and once again, that's where you're going to want to dive into those scores to find out why is it that the critic rating was so high and why is it that the audience rating was so low. These are probably the ones that are the most difficult to gauge because, again, audience rating is usually a very good indicator about how good a film is, or at least how much you're going to enjoy a film. Because, again, you can enjoy poorly made films, but at the end of the day, you understand when going in saying, well, I know this isn't going to win an Oscar, but hey, at least it's fun. But with movies like this, where you have this discrepancy, you're going to want to look deeper into it. But anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching. If you like this kind of video, please let me know, because I would love to start making more videos. Again, obviously, I love covering the box office numbers for you guys, but I also would like to start doing some more videos too. So if you like this video, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe, again, become a part of the Geeks and Gamers community, and also leave me a comment below. I try and read most of the top comments, and as soon as it goes live, I start reading the comments as they come in, and then as as they get more likes, etc., I'm usually able to see more because obviously I just don't have the time to read through every single one, but I do read through a lot of them. So thank y'all so much for all the support. Y'all have been absolutely amazing. Y'all are fantastic. Anyway, guys, thank y'all so much for watching. Have a great day, and as always, God bless. Right, Rose?